There are moments in life when pain teaches us to withdraw, when betrayal cuts deep, when trust is broken, when our openness is used against us, the mind begins to build walls. These walls are not made of stone or steel, but of silence, avoidance, and self-preservation. They begin as acts of protection, shields meant to guard the heart from further harm. At first they feel wise, even necessary. To stop giving, to stop sharing, to stop hoping, it feels safer than risking another wound. But over time, those same walls that once protected us begin to imprison us. What started as defense becomes distance. What began as safety becomes solitude. Every human being carries invisible boundaries formed by past experiences. Some are light, like gentle fences that define where comfort ends and courage begins. Others are high and thick, built after years of disappointment. You can hear it in how people speak. The hesitation in their voice when asked to trust again, the coldness in their tone when love is mentioned. These are signs of a person who has learned that caring leads to pain. So they retreat inward. They make their world smaller, quieter, more controlled. Yet, the heart is not meant to be contained. When it is caged for too long, it begins to ache not from what was done to it, but from what it can no longer feel. The walls of protection often begin with logic. If I don't let anyone in, no one can hurt me. If I keep my emotions private, I stay strong. These beliefs sound rational, but they are rooted in fear. And fear is a poor architect for the human spirit. It builds structures that may appear strong, but they are cold and airless. They keep danger out, yes, but they also keep light, warmth, and connection out. In time, isolation becomes a companion. You may convince yourself that solitude is peace, when in truth it has become avoidance. The silence grows heavy, the air thick with thoughts that never find expression. When walls rise too high, the flow of energy between people is cut off. Connection thrives on openness, on the exchange of emotions, words, and presence. When we no longer allow this flow, the energy within begins to stagnate. Just as a river that stops moving becomes murky, the spirit becomes heavy when interaction ceases. You may appear calm on the outside, but inside there is restlessness, the quiet ache of someone who longs to be seen, yet no longer knows how to be. The walls that were built to keep out pain now keep out life itself. Many people mistake isolation for strength. They believe detachment equals mastery. But true mastery is not in shutting out the world, it is in remaining open while being grounded. It is the ability to experience connection without losing oneself. Those who have built walls often say, "I don't need anyone." But beneath that statement lies a different truth. I am afraid that if I need someone, they will not be there. The heart whispers what the mouth refuses to say. Over time, these walls begin to alter perception. You start to see others not as potential friends or companions, but as possible threats. You interpret kindness with suspicion and generosity with doubt. The wall distorts reality. It turns warmth into danger, closeness into risk. Slowly the world begins to feel smaller, harsher, and colder. Not because it has changed, but because the lens through which you view it has narrowed. This is how protection becomes a prison. You are still alive, still functioning, but you no longer feel the pulse of life moving through you. The most difficult truth to face is that these walls are not built by others, they are built by the self. And only the self can dismantle them. Yet breaking them down cannot be forced. The heart once wounded needs patience. To lower one's walls does not mean rushing to trust everyone again. It means learning to trust yourself again. To know that even if you are hurt, you have the strength to recover. When you begin to trust your own resilience, the fear of connection fades. It takes courage to open the door again after living so long in the dark. But courage does not mean the absence of fear, it means walking through it. Every act of openness, a conversation, a shared moment, a small gesture of honesty, weakens the walls slightly. The light enters through the cracks. Over time, those cracks widen and the air becomes lighter. The heart begins to remember what it feels like to give without guarding, to receive without calculating. When people isolate themselves for too long, they lose the rhythm of human interaction. They forget that friendship, like breath, is an exchange, a flow of giving and receiving. Without it, the inner world becomes suffocating. You may meditate, read, and reflect, but if you do not allow the energy of connection to move through you, the spirit remains incomplete. Every human being is meant to exist both in solitude and in relation. One nurtures inner peace, the other brings external harmony. When one is missing, the balance is lost. Walls are easy to build because they are made from pain, and pain is abundant. But to build bridges, one must use patience, humility, and empathy. Materials much harder to find. The person who lives behind walls often feels misunderstood, unseen, and unheard. But that experience is partly self-created. By refusing to be vulnerable, they deny others the chance to understand them. They long for connection while keeping the gate locked. The paradox of protection is that it gives temporary comfort but long-term emptiness. It numbs pain, but it also numbs joy. It keeps out harm but also love. The soul, deprived of connection, begins to shrink. It becomes cautious, calculated, and distant. Yet deep within there remains a faint longing, a memory of warmth, laughter, and belonging. That memory is the heart's way of reminding you that freedom is not found in isolation, but in trust. The moment one realizes that the same walls that guard also suffocate is the moment awareness begins. And awareness is the first step toward freedom. One of the most subtle and destructive habits of the human mind is the constant need to be right. It hides itself under the illusion of intelligence, logic, and certainty. But beneath it lies fear. The fear of being wrong, the fear of losing control, and the fear of being unseen or invalidated. When a person clings to the desire to always be right, they close the door to understanding. They stop listening, not because they cannot hear, but because they have already decided what the truth is. In that moment, conversation becomes competition, dialogue becomes debate, and connection turns into conflict. To understand is to open oneself. It requires silence, presence, and humility. But the one who is obsessed with being right cannot be silent. They must defend, explain, and justify. They treat every exchange as a test of their worth or intelligence. And so, the simple beauty of understanding another person is lost in the noise of proving a point. You can watch it happen in everyday life, in families, friendships, relationships, and workplaces. Two people may speak for hours, yet nothing changes because both are listening only to respond, not to receive. The need to be right blinds them to the shared truth that lies between them. When the ego takes control of communication, it transforms understanding into a battlefield. It whispers, if you admit you are wrong, you are weak. If you agree, you have lost. But in reality, the one who seeks to understand holds the greater strength, for understanding demands self-mastery. It asks you to quiet your inner voice, to put aside your pride, and to allow another's truth to exist beside your own. The person who can do this is not submissive. They are wise. For wisdom is not found in dominance of thought, but in the harmony between perspectives. Many people spend years trapped in the illusion of intellectual certainty. They read, study, and observe, but all this knowledge serves only to reinforce their opinions. They mistake familiarity with understanding. To know something in the mind is not the same as to understand it in the heart. Knowledge can be collected, but understanding must be lived. And when a person's sense of identity is built upon always being correct, they become rigid. Rigid people may appear confident, but they are brittle. A single challenge threatens to shatter their composure. In contrast, those who value understanding over correctness remain fluid. They can bend without breaking, because their strength lies not in ego, but in awareness. The need to be right is often rooted in childhood. Many have learned that approval comes from being praised, being correct, or being smarter than others. Over time, this conditioning turns into a deep-seated fear of being wrong. To be wrong feels like failure. To be questioned feels like rejection. So, they develop the habit of defending their ideas as though defending their identity. Every disagreement feels personal. They cannot separate what they believe from who they are. Thus, when their ideas are challenged, they feel attacked, and instead of listening, they prepare their defense. This emotional armor protects the ego, but it kills communication. To understand another person requires stillness. It requires one to stop thinking for a moment and simply be present. When you truly listen without preparing your response, you begin to feel the emotion behind the words. You hear not just what is said, but what is meant. You see the fear behind anger, the longing behind resistance, the pain behind arrogance. In that space of perception, compassion arises naturally. And where compassion lives, the need to be right fades. Because the heart realizes that being right brings victory only to the ego, while understanding brings peace to the soul. The world today feeds the need to be right. Social media rewards arguments, not empathy. People rush to share opinions without reflection. Every topic becomes polarized, right or wrong, good or bad, for or against. Yet, life is never so simple. Truth is layered, shifting, and often incomplete. The wise know that even their understanding is temporary. They hold their beliefs lightly, knowing that tomorrow's experience may reveal a deeper truth. The need to be right, however, keeps one stuck in yesterday's perspective. It makes growth impossible, for how can one learn when one already believes they know? In relationships, the cost of this habit is immense. Many bonds have been broken not by betrayal, but by stubbornness. Partners who once loved each other deeply drift apart because neither can let go of the need to win an argument. Parents and children grow distant because each insists the other does not understand. Friends stop speaking because pride overshadows patience. The irony is that both sides often suffer the same pain. They both want to be heard, to be understood, to be respected. Yet both are too busy proving themselves right to offer what they seek. The moment you step back from the need to be right, you begin to see the subtle movements of the ego. You notice how quickly it reacts, how it interrupts, how it resists uncertainty. You notice how it uses language to dominate rather than connect. And with awareness, you start to slow down. You listen not to confirm your beliefs, but to expand them. You begin to realize that understanding another person does not mean agreeing with them. It simply means making space for their truth to exist beside yours. That space, open, quiet, and free of judgment, is where real communication begins. The more one practices understanding, the lighter the mind becomes. The energy once wasted on defending and debating transforms into curiosity and compassion. You start to notice the peace that arises when you no longer need to convince anyone of anything. Your words become gentler, your tone calmer. Others begin to feel safe around you because they sense that you are not there to win, but to listen. In this way, understanding becomes not just a skill, but a presence. A silent strength that heals misunderstanding without force. When a person is trapped in the need to be right, every disagreement feels like war. But when a person seeks to understand, even conflict becomes an opportunity to grow. To listen deeply is to free oneself from the narrow walls of ego. The mind that understands expands, the mind that insists contracts. Every moment you choose understanding over being right, you dismantle the illusion of separation. You begin to realize that wisdom does not shout to be heard. It listens to what others cannot say. There is an invisible current that runs through every human being, a current of emotion, awareness, and presence. It moves through the body like water through a river, nourishing the heart, mind, and soul. When this current flows freely, one feels connected, alive, and open to life. But when fear, disappointment, or past pain cause us to guard our emotions too tightly, this natural flow becomes obstructed. Emotional guardedness acts like a dam in the river of our being. It stops the movement of feeling, blocks the exchange of energy with others, and slowly, silently, begins to dry out the spirit. Many people live in this state without realizing it. They appear calm, composed, and in control on the outside, yet inside they are distant and closed. They do not allow themselves to feel too much, not too sad, not too happy, not too vulnerable. They fear that expressing too deeply will make them weak, that showing emotions will invite rejection, or that being open will lead to disappointment. So, they build emotional walls, thinking they are protecting themselves, but what they are truly protecting themselves from is life itself. For emotion is the bridge through which life connects to us, and when that bridge is blocked, the sense of vitality slowly fades. When one guards their emotions, the energy within becomes trapped. Emotions that are not expressed do not disappear, they remain within, condensed and heavy. Unspoken sadness settles into the body as tension, anger turns into restlessness, and fear disguises itself as numbness. Over time, these unacknowledged emotions begin to shape perception. A guarded person no longer experiences the world as it is, but through the lens of caution and defense. They interpret warmth as threat, intimacy as danger, and love as risk. Their energy field contracts, creating distance between themselves and others. Conversations become shallow, relationships lose depth, and silence becomes their safest language. Emotional guardedness is often learned, not chosen. It begins with pain, a betrayal, a humiliation, a moment where openness was met with rejection. The heart, once hurt, decides that feeling is unsafe. The mind joins in agreement, promising to protect at all costs. Together, they form an inner barrier, never again. But this promise, though made with good intention, becomes a prison. It prevents the very healing that could free the heart from pain. Because to heal, one must feel. To release, one must allow. And to connect, one must open. Guardedness blocks all three. You can often sense emotional guardedness in people not by what they say, but by what they withhold. Their smiles are polite but restrained. Their laughter ends quickly. Their eyes observe but rarely reveal. They avoid deep topics, change the subject when feelings arise, or intellectualize emotion instead of experiencing it. They may appear composed and independent, but beneath the surface, there is loneliness. A quiet ache that no amount of control can soothe. They crave closeness but fear it at the same time. This internal contradiction keeps them in a cycle of wanting connection, but avoiding the vulnerability required to receive it. When energy cannot flow outward through emotional expression, it turns inward. The person begins to overthink, overanalyze, and internalize every experience. The mind becomes busy because the heart is silent. This imbalance between thought and feeling creates inner tension. One begins to live more in the head and less in the body. Intuition fades, empathy dulls, and the ability to feel joy diminishes. The flow of energy that once moved freely through emotion now becomes stuck in mental loops. They replay the past, anticipate the future, but rarely inhabit the present moment, for the present always demands openness. Emotions are not weaknesses to be managed, they are messages to be understood. Each feeling is a form of energy-seeking movement. When sadness arises, it asks for release. When anger appears, it seeks transformation. When love expands, it wishes to connect. Guardedness interrupts this natural dialogue. It keeps emotions locked in the body, causing stagnation, not just mentally, but physically. You can see it in the posture. Shoulders tense, chest closed, breath shallow. The energy of emotion that should rise and fall like waves becomes frozen. Life begins to feel flat, repetitive, colorless. Nothing truly touches the heart anymore. True strength does not come from emotional control, but from emotional clarity. To allow emotions to flow is to allow energy to move. When you permit yourself to feel without judgment, the current within starts to clear. Tears cleans, laughter uplifts, silence restores. The guarded person often confuses emotional openness with chaos, but openness does not mean losing control. It means regaining connection. It is not about reacting to every feeling, but about allowing each feeling to move through you, leaving you lighter and more balanced. Relationships suffer most under emotional guardedness. Connection thrives on the exchange of energy between two open hearts. When one person remains closed, the flow becomes one-sided. The other feels unseen, unheard, and unloved. Misunderstandings multiply, not because words are missing, but because energy is missing. Communication without emotional openness is like music without sound. The notes exist, but the melody is absent. A guarded person may say the right things, perform the right gestures, but something will always feel incomplete. True connection cannot be faked, it is felt. Letting down emotional guards requires courage because it means stepping into uncertainty. There is no guarantee that openness will be met with kindness, but there is certainty that guardedness will be met with emptiness. The heart must take the risk of vulnerability to experience the fullness of life. It must trust that even if it is hurt again, it can heal again. The flow of energy depends on this trust. The belief that feeling deeply is not a danger but a privilege. Every tear, every smile, every ache, and every joy is part of the movement of life's energy through the human form. When energy flows freely through emotion, you feel lighter, clearer, and more connected to everything around you. The boundary between self and others softens, and empathy expands. You begin to sense the emotions of others, not as threats but as reflections. You realize that emotional exchange is not something to fear but something to honor. It is through this exchange that life reveals its depth. Guardedness may offer protection from pain, but it also withholds beauty, love, and transformation. And so the journey toward emotional openness is not about becoming more expressive for the world, but about allowing the flow of life to return within yourself. The mind loves to judge. It does so almost automatically, labeling, comparing, evaluating every person and situation it encounters. It convinces itself that judgment is clarity, that to categorize is to understand. Yet every time we judge another person, we create distance. Judgment builds invisible walls between hearts that could have connected. It turns human beings into concepts, reducing the depth of their experience into fragments of assumption. And once judgment takes root, it spreads quietly, shaping perception and limiting compassion. The space it creates is not only between people, but also within, between who we are and who we could be if we learn to see without condemnation. When you judge someone, what truly happens is that you stop seeing them. You stop perceiving the fluidity of their emotions, the complexity of their story, and the reasons behind their behavior. Instead, the mind freezes them into an image: selfish, weak, arrogant, cold. That image becomes a mental shortcut, a defense mechanism. It saves the ego from uncertainty. It gives a false sense of superiority. Yet in this act of judgment, the possibility for understanding vanishes. The moment you think you already know what someone is, you stop being curious about who they are. Judgment often arises from our own insecurities. When we carry unhealed wounds, it becomes easier to project them onto others rather than face them within ourselves. The one who fears rejection may judge others as distant. The one who feels inadequate may call others arrogant. The one who hides their sadness may judge others for being emotional. In this way, judgment becomes a mirror of what we have not yet accepted in ourselves. It allows us to momentarily escape self-reflection, but at the cost of empathy. What we reject externally is often what we refuse to embrace internally. The distance created by judgment can be subtle or severe. Sometimes it's a slight withdrawal, a quiet closing of the heart after misunderstanding someone's words or actions. Other times, it is total separation, a relationship ending not because of betrayal, but because one person decided the other was no longer worthy of understanding. And what makes this distance so painful is that it forms faster than time can repair it. A single harsh judgment can undo years of connection. Words spoken in certainty can cut deeper than silence. Time may soften the wound, but if the judgment remains unexamined, the wall stays standing. True healing between people does not happen through time alone. It happens through awareness. Time may dull the pain of judgment, but it does not dissolve the separation it creates. That requires humility. The willingness to question one's own perspective. To ask, was I truly seeing this person, or was I seeing my fear reflected in them? Did I listen, or did I assume? Did I try to understand their heart, or did I protect my own pride? These questions are uncomfortable, but they open the gates of empathy. Without them, the distance only widens. Judgment thrives in environments of misunderstanding. It feeds on partial truths. A glance, a gesture, a word taken out of context. These fragments become evidence for the mind eager to categorize. Yet, human beings are not simple equations. They are ever-changing stories. When you judge based on a moment, you freeze an entire person in a single frame, forgetting that one day, one word, one mistake does not define an entire soul. To see beyond that frame requires presence. The ability to stay open when the mind wants to close, to observe without labeling, and to feel without controlling. The need to judge comes from the illusion of control. When we define others, we feel secure. We believe that by understanding their flaws, we can protect ourselves from them. But this protection is false. In judging others, we do not make the world safer, we make it smaller. The circle of people we can truly connect with begins to shrink. Only those who fit our definitions remain close, and even they must walk carefully, fearing that one day our judgment may turn on them too. In this way, judgment not only isolates others, it isolates us from ourselves. Relationships built on judgment lack true intimacy. They are filled with caution instead of trust, correction instead of compassion. Every word is weighed, every action analyzed. Instead of listening to the soul behind the words, the mind listens for flaws. Over time, the other person stops sharing their inner world, sensing that they are being evaluated, not understood. The warmth that once existed turns cold, not because love has vanished, but because judgment has frozen it. Connection withers in the presence of constant evaluation, just as a flower cannot bloom in shadow. It is easy to justify judgment by calling it discernment. But discernment observes without condemnation. It sees what is, while judgment insists on what should be. Discernment allows learning, judgment blocks it. To discern is to recognize, to understand, to move wisely. To judge is to conclude, to reject, to close. The difference lies in intention. When you discern, you are guided by awareness. When you judge, you are driven by ego. The ego seeks to elevate itself by lowering others, while awareness seeks to understand the nature of all. There is a quiet suffering that exists within those who constantly judge. Deep down, they long for connection but cannot find it because their mind separates them from everyone they meet. They analyze rather than feel, measure rather than relate. They may appear confident in their opinions, yet beneath that confidence lies loneliness. To judge is to stand apart, always observing, rarely belonging. The more one judges, the less one experiences unity with others. And without unity, there can be no peace. To release judgment does not mean abandoning discernment or allowing harm. It means seeing the humanity in others even when they stumble. It means remembering that every person acts from a place of their current understanding, their current level of awareness. The one who hurts is often hurting. The one who criticizes is often craving acceptance. When we understand this, the impulse to judge transforms into compassion. Instead of saying, "They are wrong," the heart begins to whisper, "They are learning, just as I am." Distance built by judgment can take years to notice, but only a moment to create. And that is the tragedy of it. How quickly words and thoughts can separate what the heart once held close. Every act of judgment carries an unseen cost. It weakens the bond between souls. Time alone cannot repair that, for time heals only what awareness allows. Until one sees the illusion in their own judgment, the barrier remains. Judgment freezes time between people, holding them hostage in a single moment of misunderstanding long after life has moved on. Trust is a delicate thread, invisible yet powerful, holding the weight of every relationship, every bond, every unspoken promise between human hearts. It takes time, patience, and presence to weave, but only a moment of inconsistency to unravel. When actions no longer align with words, when moods shift without clarity, when intentions are uncertain, the foundation of trust begins to crumble long before it has the chance to strengthen. Inconsistency does not announce itself loudly, it arrives quietly. Through small changes, forgotten promises, unexplained silences. Yet its effect runs deep, leaving behind confusion, doubt, and emotional distance that even time struggles to repair. To be consistent is to be dependable, not perfect, not unchanging, but aligned. Consistency builds safety in the unseen spaces of the mind. It allows others to relax their guard, to open, to share without fear. When someone knows they can rely on your words, your tone, your presence, a quiet peace forms. But when your behavior shifts unpredictably, that peace is replaced by vigilance. People start watching, calculating, and anticipating instead of trusting. They begin to wonder which version of you will show up, the one who listens or the one who withdraws, the one who promises or the one who forgets, the one who loves openly or the one who suddenly turns cold. Inconsistency breeds uncertainty, and uncertainty breeds anxiety. A heart cannot rest in uncertainty. It needs rhythm, a steady pulse of truth, honesty, and alignment. Just as a plant cannot grow in unstable soil, trust cannot grow where the ground keeps shifting. Even the most forgiving person eventually tires of having to guess where they stand. They begin to withhold themselves, not out of resentment, but out of self-protection. Their openness diminishes, their warmth cools, and their belief in the relationship weakens. Many people underestimate the power of their inconsistencies. They think small contradictions go unnoticed, but the heart notices everything. When words say one thing and actions show another, confusion begins to take root. You may say you care, but your silence says otherwise. You may promise to change, but your repetition of old habits speaks louder. Trust is built not through grand gestures, but through the repetition of small, truthful actions. Every consistent act tells the other person, "You can rely on me." Every inconsistent one whispers, "Be careful." Inconsistency is often not born of malice but of unawareness. It arises when a person speaks from emotion rather than intention, when they make promises in moments of enthusiasm, but fail to follow through when discipline is required. The inconsistent person does not realize the confusion they cause because their mind changes faster than their memory of what was said. They may justify it as being spontaneous, flexible, or real. Yet authenticity without stability becomes chaos. Realness must be grounded, otherwise it harms more than it heals. Trust is fragile because it exists in the realm of feeling, not logic. You cannot reason someone into trusting you, you earn it by being predictably sincere. Each time you act differently than your words, the emotional mind takes note. It begins to store evidence, consciously or unconsciously, of instability. Over time, this creates a pattern of doubt. The other person may continue to smile, to interact, but deep within, their faith begins to fade. They start to hold back pieces of themselves. What once was open becomes guarded. They do not confront immediately because the mind wants to believe in hope, but the heart quietly starts preparing for disappointment. In relationships, romantic, familial, or professional, consistency is a form of respect. It communicates, I value the trust you've given me. When that consistency is broken repeatedly, respect begins to erode. Even if forgiveness is offered, the sense of reliability rarely returns fully. Because once a person has learned that your words may not hold, they will forever listen with hesitation. And hesitation is the death of emotional closeness. Where there should be ease, there is now calculation. Where there should be flow, there is now resistance. Inconsistency also damages self-trust. Every time you fail to honor your own word, your own intention, you teach your inner self that you cannot rely on you. It becomes harder to keep commitments, harder to follow through, harder to believe in your own strength. Internal inconsistency leads to external inconsistency. The person who cannot be steady within themselves will struggle to be steady for others. Consistency begins in the self, in how you show up for your own goals, your own healing, your own truth. If you break promises to yourself easily, you will do the same in relationships without realizing it. One of the most painful effects of inconsistency is confusion. When someone shows care one day and detachment the next, when affection turns cold without explanation, the heart left behind begins to question its own worth. It wonders what changed, what went wrong, what it did to deserve withdrawal. This confusion breeds self-doubt. The person on the receiving end begins to think the inconsistency reflects them, not realizing it reflects the inner turbulence of the other. Thus, inconsistency does not only destroy trust, it damages the self-esteem of those who believe in it. Stability is not about perfection, it is about presence. It means showing up honestly even when you are uncertain. It means communicating when your energy changes rather than disappearing. It means taking responsibility when you fall short instead of pretending nothing happened. Each of these small acts rebuilds the thread of trust. But when one chooses avoidance over honesty, excuses over reflection, inconsistency becomes habitual. Over time, this habit defines one's character, a pattern that follows them into every connection, leaving behind a trail of mistrust. Consistency is also a reflection of integrity. When your inner state aligns with your outer actions, people feel safe around you. They may not always agree with you, but they will respect you. But when there is a gap between what you say and what you do, between who you present yourself as and who you truly are, people sense it. Even without words, energy reveals inconsistency. The human spirit is intuitive. It feels when something doesn't match. And once that feeling arises, it is hard to silence. Trust grows slowly, like a seed nurtured by attention, time, and care. Each consistent act is like sunlight, each broken word like frost. You may not notice the damage after one cold night, but repeated exposure eventually kills what was once alive. Inconsistency does the same to trust. It freezes warmth, withers connection, and leaves behind emptiness. And no matter how many apologies are spoken afterward, the heart that once trusted without question begins to question everything. Rejection is one of the deepest emotional wounds a human being can experience. It threatens the very foundation of belonging, the sense of being accepted as we are. The fear of rejection often takes root in early life, a moment when love felt conditional, when expression was met with criticism, when vulnerability was punished rather than embraced. That memory may fade from conscious thought, but its echo remains in the heart. Over time, it becomes an invisible force shaping how one connects, loves, and trusts. The tragedy is that the fear of rejection left unexamined often creates the very rejection one hopes to avoid. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, replaying the same emotional story again and again until awareness interrupts the cycle. When someone fears rejection, their energy changes before any words are spoken. It shows in the way they hesitate before sharing, in the guarded tone of their voice, in the constant scanning of the other person's reactions. They overthink every silence, every pause, every glance. Their focus shifts from connection to protection, from expressing to controlling. This subtle change is felt by others. Instead of sensing openness, people sense fear. Instead of trust, they sense tension. And when fear becomes the energy that guides communication, connection becomes difficult to maintain. The person fearing rejection ends up creating distance without realizing it. The fear of rejection builds walls disguised as boundaries. The person tells themselves they are simply being careful, that they are protecting their peace, but what they are really doing is avoiding exposure. They avoid saying how they feel, avoid asking for what they need, avoid showing their true self. They live half present, hoping that playing it safe will keep them from being hurt. But love and friendship require visibility. They demand to be seen as we are. When you hide your truth to avoid rejection, you may avoid pain temporarily, but you also avoid intimacy. The relationship becomes shallow because only half of you shows up. The more someone fears rejection, the more they begin to interpret neutral moments as threats. A delayed message becomes a sign of disinterest. A quiet tone becomes evidence of anger. The mind, conditioned by fear, begins to rewrite reality. It searches for signs of abandonment, even where none exist. And because the mind always finds what it seeks, the person eventually convinces themselves that they are being rejected. Once this belief takes hold, they start to withdraw emotionally, not because they have been rejected, but because they believe rejection is coming. This withdrawal creates coldness, confusion, and tension in the relationship. The other person senses this distance, responds with their own uncertainty, and the very thing that was feared, disconnection, becomes real. Fear changes behavior, and behavior shapes outcome. When you expect to be rejected, you begin to act in ways that ensure rejection will occur. You become overly cautious, withholding warmth to test the other's interest. You may even push people away first, just to avoid being left later. It becomes a defensive ritual. If I reject you before you reject me, I remain in control. But control is the opposite of connection. Love cannot exist where control dominates. The fear of rejection thus becomes a loop. The more you protect yourself, the less connected you feel. The less connected you feel, the more you believe rejection is inevitable. In many cases, people who fear rejection attract situations that reinforce their belief. The energy of fear subtly calls forth what it expects. They may unconsciously choose emotionally unavailable partners, critical friends, or distant family members, all reflecting the inner conviction that love will not stay. It is not that the world is cruel. It is that the inner vibration of fear shapes outer experiences. The subconscious seeks familiarity even when that familiarity hurts. The fear of rejection therefore keeps recreating rejection because it feels safer to repeat the known pain than to risk the unknown joy of acceptance. To fear rejection is to carry an unhealed belief about one's worth. Somewhere within, there is a voice that says, if they truly see me, they will leave. This belief makes every act of openness feel dangerous. So one begins to craft an image, a version of self designed to be liked, admired, or accepted. But this image is a mask, and masks cannot receive love, only attention. True love requires authenticity. When someone loves the mask, the heart behind it remains untouched. This deepens the loneliness, reinforcing the false belief. Even when I'm loved, it's not the real me they love. And so the cycle of fear continues. Hiding, pretending, fearing, withdrawing. The body too carries the signature of this fear. Shoulders tense when affection is offered. Breath shortens when vulnerability is near. The nervous system braces for disappointment before it even arrives. The body remembers past rejections and reacts as though they are happening again. Without awareness, this becomes habitual, a physiological reflex that blocks emotional openness. You begin to feel unsafe in connection, not because the present moment is unsafe, but because the body is replaying an old memory of loss. Every relationship mirrors this fear in some form. The moment another person gets close enough to touch the guarded parts of the self, the instinct to retreat arises. You start to overanalyze, question motives, search for flaws. You sabotage the connection to protect yourself. Yet, each act of self-protection strengthens the fear itself. Rejection, whether real or imagined, becomes proof of the very thing you feared. See, I knew they would leave. What goes unnoticed is that your own guardedness, your own distance, quietly invited that outcome. The fear of rejection also limits growth. When one is ruled by this fear, they avoid opportunities that involve vulnerability, speaking up, sharing ideas, expressing emotion, or pursuing passion. They shrink from life, staying small to remain unnoticed. But invisibility is not safety, it is isolation. The heart cannot thrive in hiding. It is meant to expand, to express, to connect. The fear of rejection turns this natural expansion inward, trapping the life force within walls of hesitation. There is a profound irony in the fear of rejection. The very act of trying to avoid being unloved creates unloving behavior. The very desire to be accepted leads to inauthenticity, which makes true acceptance impossible. It is not rejection from others that hurts the most. It is the rejection of one's own truth in the process of seeking approval. Every time you silence your voice to please others, every time you pretend to be unaffected when you are hurting, every time you walk away before you can be seen, you reject yourself first, and when self-rejection becomes a habit, the world simply reflects it back. Rejection cannot destroy the self that knows its worth. It only destroys the illusion that love must be earned. But when worth is still dependent on others, fear becomes constant. That fear speaks through silence, through overthinking, through withdrawal, through guardedness. It quietly creates the very outcome it fears, proving itself again and again until one day awareness rises and the pattern is seen for what it is. Not fate, not punishment, but an echo of a belief asking to be released.